Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready to do Brihat Samhita, the next installment, which is chapter 2. So let's begin chapter 2. It's about the astrologer. Varahamihira is going to talk about qualities that an astrologer should have. Video looks a bit jumpy, doesn't it? All right. Let me just see something. It's a network that's dropping. So anyway, bear with me today. I think as of tomorrow, I'll have a smooth connection for YouTube. All right. Let me get the Brihat Samhita readable. Where is it? Here it is. All right. Chapter 2. He's going to say, he starts off by saying, we're now going to comment. He's going to comment about aphorisms relating to an astrologer. So he's going to quote 13 things, 13 statements about what kind of a person would make a good astrologer. I don't really think that we need to read the quotes because then he's going to comment on the quotes. So I'm going to skip to his comments. His comments begin by he says, how could one who is not able to understand the ideas contained in the Shastras, nor cares to answer any question that may be put to him, nor explains his views to his students, be termed an astrologer that has grasped the essence of the science? So, apparently, he's referring to stuff that was in his quotes. For example, the 13th quote says, a true astrologer can understand the objectives and points of differences, the objections and points of differences, and meet them in clear and convincing language, proving the truth of the science in its pristine purity. Right? So in other words, the astrologer is supposed to be an intelligent person who's not afraid of debate. Sorry, because I put up the debates about the tropical zodiac and people were like, why are you doing that? An actual astrologer should be a person who can actually debate with opposing opinions, resolve opposing, answer questions, address doubts. I think astrology is just junk. It's just witchcraft. That you should be able to, reply to that statement. Stuff like that. You should therefore understand the Shastra, which in this case doesn't mean the Vedas, but which means the statements of the greats in your science, the people who have really explained your science well, people like Varahamihira. An astrologer should understand their arguments, their points of view, their thoughts, so that they can explain those things to others. So he's saying, without that quality, how can you call a person an astrologer who has grasped the concept of astrology? If you can't reply to a doubt, then you don't know what you're talking about. It's just as simple as that. Next thing he says, since I know some of the things in these 13 quotes, so if his comments, I feel, miss something that I thought was interesting in the quotes, I'll go back and read you the quotes. Comment 2, he says, he is only a fool whose interpretation is opposed to the spirit of the text and whose calculations are also wrong. So here's two points. He makes 2 points about the qualifications of an astrologer. You have to interpret the astrology in in a similar way as the greats have interpreted it. Like if you're suddenly coming up with a new interpretation of Jupiter in Cancer, for example, and start to say that exalted planets actually they're not that great, they're not that exalted, then what you're doing is you're only a fool, according to Varahamihira. Your interpretations are opposed to the spirit of what the ancients and the classical and ancient astrologers have established. Then how can you be described as a good astrologer? So he says he's only a fool whose interpretations are opposed to the spirit of the Shastra. And if your calculations are wrong, you're also a fool. So you better have these three qualities if you're going to be an astrologer. One, you better know how to do the calculations. You better know what these things are. You better know what houses are and why they are. You better know why the planets retrograde. You better know what the signs are and where they are. Then the same with the nakshatras. So you better have that thing, the ability to at least understand the calculations. You better be able to interpret things in harmony with the way they were meant to be interpreted by the people who established the science in the ancient times. And three, you should be able to dialogue with people about astrology without being unable to address doubts, questions, or criticisms. Those are the three things that make a good astrologer. He says if you can't do this, if you can't do these things, this is now Varahamihira, he says if you can't do these things but you still practice astrology, then you're like somebody who goes to Brahma and starts to praise Saraswati as a great prostitute. You really don't know what you're doing. So I have a question here on YouTube. The question is, so you do need a high IQ. Yes, you do need a high IQ. You need to be intelligent because you have to understand a science. I don't know if you literally need a high IQ score from an IQ test, but you have to be an intelligent person who knows how to handle questions and answers and doubts and is capable of study. For sure. Next. Here it is. Next he says, when the astrologer has well understood the mathematical portion and has arrived at the correct lagna, ascendant, by means of shadow, water appliance, etc., and has acquired a firm grasp of the science, his predictions and teachings will never prove void of effect. So in other words, if you got these three qualities, where you understand how to do calculations, get your calculations right, you understand the way the ancient establishers of the science have described the interpretations, the fundamental interpretations, and you are able to dialogue about these things, then you're going to be a good astrologer. Okay? Interesting that he says you have to be able to arrive at the correct ascendant because it's the most complicated calculation. And he says by means of shadow and water appliance. That means by clocks. Because he's talking about tropical calculations, shadows and water appliances, which is not that earth-shattering because even the siderealist has to calculate the ascendant by tropical measure and then translate it. Alrighty, we can continue. There's other interesting things. He quotes now Vishnugupta. Well, I don't know who this person is. He quotes somebody named Vishnugupta, and he says, maybe it's possible that somebody could get across the ocean by the wind. Like, right? You could take a boat across the ocean. But it's impossible for a person who's not a sage to even theoretically understand astrology. So astrology is a very complicated, sophisticated, detailed, and elaborate science. It's not for people who dally and dilly and dabble. There's this saying in India is every second person is a doctor. Every second person thinks that. It's so ridiculous to hold an astrological debate, for example, and see the reactions. Everybody gives their own opinion. Who cares about your opinion? I'm sorry. Like, however you mastered the thing. Listen to the people in the debate. People have actually subconsciously denigrated the science so much that they think anybody should be able to do it, and anybody's opinion on it is just fine. It's equally valuable. But it's not like that. You have to be a very intelligent, studied, and actually somewhat traditional person, or you have to be able to respect tradition, the astrological tradition, to be able to even theoretically. Vishnu Gupta says, sure, you could get across the ocean by the wind, maybe. Maybe you could travel across the ocean in a boat, but you cannot get across the ocean of astrology unless you're a sage. Exactly. Alrighty. Let's see, now he seems to have two more quotes. So now he's got a 14th and a 15th quote. I think I'm going to read these quotes. Then he gives another comment. He has got a clear grasp of the astrological science, inclusive of the mathematical portion. So a lot of people think you don't need to know how to calculate the Navamsha, for example, or how to calculate the ascendant. Well, you don't need to know that. You just need to buy Parashar's light or solar fire gold. That's all you have to do. And that is one of the biggest mistakes ever. Now, don't think that I sit there and calculate the houses and ascendant for every single reading that I do. I use the astrology softwares, right? But I know how to do it. So I know what the things are. That is important. To know what the software is doing so that you know how to adjust the settings, so that you make the settings correct, so that if somebody starts to say, I think the zodiac should be tropical, you can make an intelligent contribution to that discussion. Or if somebody starts to say, I think that there are 13 zodiac signs. I think that we should base astrology on heliocentrism. If you don't know how calculations are made in the fundamental science of astrology, you won't be able to make any meaningful response to such things, or to make any meaningful or intelligent decision about such points. So although it's not reasonable to ask astrologers to hand calculate every single chart, it is reasonable to insist that they know what these calculations are, and that they could do them if they have to, so that they're actually wise and learned about what is being calculated. Okay, so he who has got a clear grasp of the astrological science, inclusive of the mathematical portion, as if it was spread before his eyes in the world, and engraved in his intellect and embedded in his heart, the predictions made by him will never prove ineffective. So in other words, you really have to know, like the same way that you know how to get to your house from the train station, or the same way that you know how to make microwave popcorn. You have to know what an ascendant is, what a house is, what the signs are, what the planets are, what they look like, how they move. If you know it that well, And if you understand similarly well how to combine symbols and come up with interpretations from that, then you're going to be a good astrologer. And if you don't have that depth of clear understanding, you won't. Let me see. So now we're going to look at... So he's got 17 quotes. Got some heavy duty things. I'm giving you the mild stuff. His comments on it. Then he says, a king who does not patronize an astrologer, a king who does not patronize the astrologer who's qualified as described is going to be ruined. So that's important. That means that you have to pay astrologers. That means that people have to subsidize the astrologer. Otherwise, how in the world is the astrologer supposed to dedicate all this time to studying, learning, thinking, and explaining? So I'm sorry to all the people out there who like to grief astrologers who charge money for their services. But there ain't no kings patronizing us. There ain't no government funding for us. So it falls upon you. And if you don't do that, you come to grief. Even sages who have selected forests as their dwelling place. This is interesting. Look at the slok that he says right here. Even sages, even people who've given up everything, and they've gone to live in the forest to meditate, and they have no ego or arrogance, and they have no family or anything like that. They have no vested interests in the material world. They still get interested in astrology if they meet a person who truly understands it. That means that astrology has something for everybody. Even people who have no material interest. Because primarily astrology is for material things. But a person who truly knows astrology can make astrology relevant even to somebody who's completely spiritual. He says, just as the night does not shine without a lamp, the sky without the sun, so will a king have pitfalls like a blind person if he has no astrologer to guide him. So this was the old days. In the old days, every king had an astrologer called a mantri or an advisor. Even Ronald Reagan had such. Although I don't know how much he actually relied upon the person. But he's saying a leader without an astrologer to guide them is like a blind person leading other people. So that's why the astrologer should be patronized or subsidized by the king. He says a muhurta, a tithi, a star, a nakshatra, a ritu, an ayana. These will just confuse the king if the astrologer doesn't have a good astrologer. Therefore, a king who is desirous of success, fame, wealth, all kinds of enjoyments and happiness should secure the services of a leading astrologer who is well-read, clever, and proficient in the science. So in other words, you are not going to know anything about astrology if you don't have an astrologer. You might try to do it yourself. Apparently, maybe some kings will try to do it themselves. You're going to come to ruin. One desirous of prosperity should therefore avoid residing in a place where there is no astrologer. YouTube kind of solves that problem. For the astrologer is, as it were, an eye, and no sin will creep in there. So it's like saying trying to live without an astrologer is like trying to walk without your eyes. This might seem silly to some people because there aren't really that many qualified astrologers out there. This is interesting. He says, Sloka 12, this is a nice sloka for us astrologers. He says, no person who studies astrology and divines the course of destiny will ever be seen in hell. That's not the Christian hell, but he's talking about he will never be seen suffering. He will have his permanent residence in Brahmaloka. So in other words, the astrologer is doing very good karma. If you do astrology properly, it in and of itself is dharma. To do astrology properly, to really study the science, to really be faithful to the acharyas of it, which means the sages, Brahma, the people who have established it, and to take the time and effort to dialogue intelligently about it. That's a very good deed for humanity. So you generate good karma. Therefore you get good future births, not difficult future births. 13th sloka, the Brahmin who has studied and understood completely the Samhita with the commentary is fit to be honored with the role of a chief guest in a Shraddha. And the dinner is sanctified by his company. It's very culturally specific stuff here, but like this, the person, what he's saying here is a intellectual person who has studied and practiced astrology properly is very honorable. So they're fit to be honored in the various ways that the ancient Indian culture used to do things. Oh, he has an interesting quote in Sloka 14. Let me see, I got a comment here that caught my attention. Does the sage rely on the king for provision or God through the king? It is a question of purity or motive. This is a good example. The sage who's dependent upon the patronage is no longer a sage. The sage that's dependent upon patronage becomes partial, and the quality of a sage is that have to be impartial. Otherwise, they can't say the things that they need to say. So, yeah. So the sage is actually, if the sage doesn't have patronage, they don't stop being a sage. Now, let me read you this next quote. It's pretty heavy duty. The 14th statement that he makes about the astrologer is that he says, Greeks and so forth aren't highly cultured. When the science has come to stay with them, and when such astrologers are worshipped as sages, how much more should an astrologer of the Brahmin origin be? So this is a hint that the horoscopy that Varahamihira is talking about isn't the ancient Vedic astrology, but it's the astrology that's been co-developed or highly influenced by the Greeks or the Ionians, the Yavanas. So what he's saying is, we highly respect these Yavanas who have mastered the science of astrology, so much so that they have become shapers of the science. So if we are willing to do that, these people have no actual formal place in our civilization, but we're willing to highly respect them because they've mastered the science of astrology. Then how much more should we should totally respect somebody who has some standing in our society and has similar qualification. So this is an interesting statement, proving at the time the influence of Greek astrology upon the Indian astrology is huge. So people who, for example, argue that the tropical zodiac is just a Greek invention apparently are unaware that the whole horoscopic science is highly, 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 highly developed by the Greeks. And so therefore, even if it is true that the Greeks came up with the tropical zodiac, which is not true, then it doesn't mean that it wasn't used originally in India. Shloka 15. We got a few more minutes. Prediction. Ooh. Look at this is an interesting thing. So other people can do astrology besides sages who have actually really learned it. So he's going to talk about that now. He says you can get people who are sorcerers. You can get people who are empowered by gods and goddesses. Or you can get people who just are hobbyists about astrology. Now, he says on no account should you consider their predictions because they are not astrologers. So he is definitely very heavy on the side of astrology is a science and it has to be done systematically and intelligently. It's not an intuitive free-for-all. It is not magic. It's not divine intervention, or it's not oracling. It's not sorcery. It's not oracling. And it's certainly not something that a hobbyist can become proficient at. So that's not to say that oracling isn't a valid thing, but it's not astrology. It's not to say that sorcery or magic is not a valid thing, but it's not astrology. So they should be you should separate these things. They're not astrologers. That's what he said. Anil makes an interesting point. Weren't the Greeks also influenced by the Indians? Of course. This is the science. Actually, Varahamihira did not say that we got this science from the Greeks. He said it came to reside with them. They've mastered it. It's just like water. I mean, water doesn't just flow in one direction. It flows back and forth. Or the air, it swirls all around. So the same way ideas move back and forth among societies. But the importance of Greek thinkers upon Indian astrology is undeniable. The importance of Greek astrologers. And Greek, the word for Greek is Yavana. It means people of Mediterranean types. In the 16th shloka, we got a few more minutes. In the 16th shloka, Hyperisa, he says, he who poses himself as an astrologer by his knowledge of merely locating the stars, without having actually studied and understood the science, is reckoned as a bad guy and a blot on society. So it's not just math either. And shloka 15, he said, people who just do the fortune-telling type of stuff are not astrologers. And then in the next sloka, he says people who only do the math stuff are not astrologers. Apparently, what he's trying to get across is astrology is a unique combination of mathematical science and inspired intuition. In shloka 17, he says, how many shlokas are in this? Okay. Oh, we got to get up to shloka 21. I wonder if we could do it. In shloka 17, he says, just as a prayer addressed to the clod of earth at the gate of a city for a boon is fulfilled by blind chance, so even so is considered the prophecy made by the ignorant, which sometimes comes true. So what he said is, look, sometimes you just pray to a rock or something. You wish upon something, and it works, right? That actually, it's the same way sometimes somebody who doesn't know anything actually isn't a good astrologer can make an accurate prediction. That's by chance. That's what he says there. Sloka 18, a king ought to shun. What is this? Jyotishka. Oh, Jyotishka. A king ought to shun a astrologer who justifies the occurrence of an event as a result of his original prediction. Oh. A king ought to shun an astrologer who justifies the occurrence of an event as a result of his original prediction, and who has become arrogant by dabbling in astrology and who introduces irrelevant matters. So in other words, if an astrologer starts to act like a god or a magician and say, see, I am all-knowing, and see, I could make things happen because I predicted this to happen, it happened. So astrologers who try to command power over people should be shunned. I have an astrologer in mind who's a very bad person. His name's P.T. Prashant. You should shun people like this. People who try to gain power and become gods by doing astrology should be shunned. This is what Varahamihira is saying. All right, I'm just going to read through these next 5 shlokas so we can wrap up the chapter in one section. He who is well versed in horoscopy, astronomy, and samhita should be honored by the sovereign and kept near him with a view to secure prosperity. So in other words, somebody that really knows the science well should be honored. Neither 1,000 elephants nor even 4 times that number of horses will be able to accomplish what a single astrologer who knows the time and climate can do. Funny statement, cool thing. It's because kings want to have lots of elephants and they want to have a lot of army and things like that, right? They want to have a lot of power. But what Varahamihira is saying, all your jet airplanes, nuclear bombs and so forth, wouldn't be as effective for your government as an actual astrologer who truly knows the science of astrology. As you can see, obviously astrology had a different place in society in the old days. Nobody even talks about that anymore. Sloka 21, the effect of all bad dreams, bad thoughts, bad sights, and wicked actions will vanish immediately when one hears about the moon's passage over the stars. That is such an interesting shloka.